Forum on Sustainable Development, with a spotlight on adaptation, resilience, and small-scale farmers. And we're asking the question, how small-scale farmers are being left behind, but what can we do to stop it? Before I get on and introduce the rest of the panel to you and introduce you to a very exciting event, a couple of housekeeping questions that you're all very familiar with, but useful for us to remind ourselves anyway. I'm asking all of you to kindly mute yourselves, but you will notice that there is a Q&A box, which is at the bottom of your screens, on which you will be able to post a question. That question is open to panelists, and we can read them, but nobody else can. And we'll take the questions as they come to us, and we'll also direct them to panelists once we are able to get past the initial set of speaking points that our panelists have kindly prepared. So, ladies and gentlemen, in the last 2 weeks, we have seen temperatures in Canada soaring, reaching almost 50 degrees centigrade. A temperature that scientists across the world have said would not have been possible without anthropocentric climate change, that is, climate change caused by human beings. Extreme temperatures have been recorded elsewhere across the globe as well. 48 degrees in Siberia, 50 degrees in Iraq, 55 degrees almost in Death Valley, Nevada. But it's not just temperature increases, right? There have been events that are related to climate change and have increased vulnerability and risks associated with it. There have been floods in Japan, climate-driven famines in Madagascar, and forest fires in the Western United States. This isn't normal. This is clearly a crisis. This year is the year, ladies and gentlemen, for climate action. So while we are looking for ambitious commitments on mitigation, on reducing greenhouse gas emissions from all countries, there is still a lot of work to be done urgently and now to help the world adapt to changing climate and increasing uncertainty. In this change, farmers and smallholder producers are tied even more closely than all of us to the land and rely even more intimately on natural resources, making them amongst the most vulnerable to climate change, biodiversity loss, and environmental degradation. A lot of these farmers are feeling the impacts of these sorts of changes that I spoke about, but lack the resources and capacities to adapt. It's ironical, but on the other side, these small-scale producers also make enormous contributions to our overall food systems. Indeed, many studies have recognized that they're responsible for putting more than 1/3 of the overall food that we eat on our tables. So it seems even more tragic that we are, so far, still ignoring a large amount of the vulnerability that has been caused as a consequence of our actions. But this is not all doom and gloom. This is the year of the COP26, COP15, the Food System Summit, and really an opportunity for all of us to make a difference. There have been exciting and very provoking reports that have come out in the past 6 months that have highlighted the need for action. In June, a joint IPCC-IPBES report highlighted that climate and biodiversity are really related otherwise, but are treated really independently in policy. And this can be something that we can correct very, very quickly. Another study, the UN State of Nature Finance Report, stated that the world needs to quadruple its annual investment in nature if we are to deal with the crisis related to climate, biodiversity, and land degradation. Indeed, investing just 0.1% of global GDP every year in restorative agriculture, forest, pollution management can help us close the financial gap by 2050. This is something that we can all take action on. Ladies and gentlemen, as global recognition grows for the role of agriculture and food system transformations in tackling environmental and humanitarian issues, I'm really privileged to have a very august panel to take our conversation forward today, and hopefully also talk about actions that we are taking to focus on small-scale producers as central actors in sustainable development and the importance of supporting adaptation and resilience to climate change. It is my deep and huge pleasure to introduce our esteemed panelists to all of you today. I have, in no great order, President Gilbert Hongbo, who's the president of IFAD, the president of the institution that I belong to. He's currently serving his second term as president and also sits as chair of the UN Water Group and has over 30 years of experience in public, multilateral, and private sectors. We're also privileged to have Minister Karina Gold, the Canadian Minister for International Development. Minister Gold, before her election as the Member of Parliament for Burlington, worked as a trade and investment specialist for the Mexican Trade Commission in Toronto, and has spent time working on migration development programs in the United States, as well as working in Mexico. We're also really excited to have Kekeshan Basu, who is founder president of Green Hope Foundation and a United Nations human rights champion. Ms. Basu is an environmental and human rights activist and also advocates for peace, children's rights, education for sustainable development, gender equality, and climate justice. Tellingly, in 2016, Kekeshan received the International Children's Peace Prize and the first ever Voices Youth Legacy Award for Nuclear Disarmament. We then have Mr. Aminu Dakogi Kanko, who's a youth leader and a paddy aggregator, collecting rice from small-scale farmers to sell it to bigger buyers. Though he ultimately decided to dedicate himself to agriculture, his background is in computer science, and he brings that technical focus to his agribusiness. Not only did Mr. Kanko or Aminu reschedule the entire cultivation calendar of his to the dry season by making judicious use of pump systems, he has also developed his own digital platform to sell his products directly to consumers. For Aminu, getting youth involved in policy-making processes at all levels is the way to a green economy. He'd also like to see more capacity building opportunities for rural youth. We're really pleased to have you here. With that introduction, I'm going to now move to our panelists. And just to lay out the run of play, we'll go and chat with our panelists for 5 minutes each in our first round, and then we'll have the opportunity to come back. With that, my first question is to President Hongbo. President, what topics do you think are important to consider while thinking about climate adaptation and transformation in rural spaces? And somewhat more provocatively, what actions do you think are important and who's best positioned to take them? Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Joe. And thank you, colleagues from Ottawa and New York, Washington, and Rome here for organizing, and all of you in the whole world watching and following us. I want to particularly express appreciation to Honorable Minister Gould to have really freed up her time to join us. You know, this is really sincere appreciation to you, because I know how your agenda looks like. And very, very welcome to my colleague panel members, Mrs. Basu and Mr. Kanku on that. To go to your point, let me, Joe, put 4 key dimensions. First of all, is really, when we talk the whole climate change, the adaptation side, which for me is quite critical. I don't want to repeat it again. We all know the fact that we have been focusing certainly with good reason, a lot on the mitigation side, and very small portion of the flows, the global flows going to adaptation. And therefore, it's important for us to, I cannot highlight enough the importance of the adaptation side. And second point, within that global shortcoming on the adaptation side is the component that goes to the rural communities and the rural side. So which is even worse. So I want to single out the importance for us focusing. Yes, you might tell me that IFAD, we focus all our activity on the rural communities, and I'm quite unapologetic for that. But I think that should be more a global concern than it has been so far. Then the third point for me is the women and girl, the youth, and the indigenous people dimension. And again, we know very well that COVID-19 has again demonstrated to us how the women and girl and the indigenous people in the rural communities are much more at risk in terms of the direct impact. And the SOFI report that came out earlier this week has again demonstrated that in terms of exposure, they are much more exposed, which is also true in terms of climate change. And therefore, all the way we're looking at the climate change, we really have to ensure that the gender and girls and the diversity and dimension, including the youth, is mainstream on that. My fourth point, and will be the whole climate finance side. You mentioned it in your introductory remark, Joe, but with this global flow, and I think, if I correct me if I'm wrong, if I recall very well, we talk about 1.7% or less than 2% of the global flows that goes to the small scale producers. That I just cannot understand that we will be able to make the key target under the SDG, not only SDG 1 and 2, but also the SDG 5, the 7 and 8, particularly if we really do not look at ways to increase the flows into the smallholders for them to better adapt and also to mitigate. Then, in terms of the question, what should do what? I mean, I was just tempted to use this part and really recall and the fact our program that I'm sure you also referred to, the ASAP program, which we, if I start experiencing, quite frankly, way before the Paris Declaration in 2012, which we call the Adaptation for Smallholders Program, ASAP, and now we want to scale it up to become ASAP Plus. But that has demonstrated that focusing a program like this on the small-scale producers, on the rural community, is more than needed, which has, because we have seen how the impact it has had, and secondly, how that has triggered much more demand from the communities and from the countries that we are serving. We cannot say it enough that investing in the inclusivity and making sure that we are mindful of the need for equitable investment, not only in terms of the gender dimension that I mentioned, but also in terms of the rurality and putting the youth at the forefront. So I want to insist what IFAD is trying to do, and I believe we are doing that fairly well, but certainly we all can do better, is that a mainstream integrated approach on those different dimensions. I'm sorry, if you don't stop me, I can go and abuse of your time. Let me stop here. Back to you, Joe. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. Your passion definitely shines through. Mr. President, your comments actually set us up really well for a question for Minister Gold, and welcome, Minister Gold. What are your thoughts, Minister, about how donors and institutions like IFAD can work together and work together with Canada to really make a difference to the lives of smallholders when it comes to climate change? Over to you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Joe. And if I can just start by thanking IFAD for putting this event on. I think it is really important. I think both your opening comments and President Ungbo's opening comments demonstrated that. And so I'm very pleased to be here with you today. Just building off of what President Ungbo said, it really is quite astonishing that only 2% of global climate finance is reaching small scale farmers, even though collectively they manage 20% of global farmland. To change that, we need to step up our support. And at the G7 Leaders Summit this past June, our Prime Minister Trudeau, announced that Canada's commitment to climate finance will double to $5.3 billion over 5 years. And this commitment includes increased support for adaptation and nature-based solutions in line with the G7 Nature Compact that the world leaders adopted. And adaptation action must start at the local level. And that means engaging women leaders and local communities, being able to pilot gender responsive approaches to financing adaptation, and then scale them up quickly. IFAD and Canada are aligned on this approach, and together we can make that difference. We also have to leverage our knowledge and experience, building on the successful implementation of IFAD's initial Adaptation for Smallholder Agricultural Programme, which Canada helped to found in 2012. IFAD is able to embed climate adaptation across all of its activities and reach that crucial local level where small-scale farmers live. With Canada and other donors' support, IFAD has increased its climate finance ambition to 40% of its portfolio by the end of 2024. Now that it is also committing to having 35% of its new projects be gender transformative, there is an opportunity to expand our collaboration in this critical area. And I think the way that we can continue to collaborate is to continue to raise the level of awareness of the activities that IFAD is doing. I liked how President Hungbo said he's unapologetic that the focus is in rural areas and for rural people, and particularly for women, girls, youth, and Indigenous peoples. And so I think, we understand that the heart of adapting to climate change, but also fighting climate change is going to take place, by the people who are leading this effort. And so IFAD is really doing this work that's getting to the people that need this support the most.
Thank you so much, Minister. Yeah, really exciting to have your voice here and your ambition here. I had a quick question just to probe that a little bit. How do you think we can ensure that impact actually reaches households?
Well, it's a very good question. And as I alluded to in my last answer, it's actually, the heart of what we need to be doing to ensure that we can reach people where they are to make those changes. And we know that IFAD is taking a targeted approach to that question by starting with the adaptation needs of rural communities and building partnerships at all levels, from governments to farmers' organizations and communities to the private sector. And we all need to keep working together with a strategy that brings women, youth, and Indigenous peoples to the table, and that leverages innovation, technology, and the capacity of multiple partners as we redesign value chains, policy frameworks, and decision-making processes. And I think one of the important things that IFAD is also working on is recognizing that these as we're supporting small-scale farmers, particularly women, to adapt and to be part of these value chains and supporting them economically, we also have to support them at the household level as well. And so making sure that as part of this programming, we're including gender transformative work within this, looking at power imbalances within the household, addressing gender-based violence, addressing education is so important to make sure that we're empowering people, not just economically, but also with regards to their own rights, with regards to gender rights, with regards to making sure that they have that fullness of participation within society that really starts at the household level.
Thank you so much, Minister. From one advocate and activist to another, I'm going to move to Kekashan Basu. Ms. Basu, you're an activist. Do you think we are doing enough? What do you think are the shortcomings or failures in our current approaches, especially to integrate social and environmental justice? Over to you, Kekashan.
Thank you for the questions, and hello, everyone. Good morning from Toronto, Canada. It is truly wonderful to be here with all of you today. To answer your questions, Joe, I think that the first step lies in acknowledging that the problem exists, and that is why I'm so enthused that the concept note for today's discussion begins with the statement, small-scale producers remain underserved by global climate finance. Now, as someone who has been working with marginalized rural communities in the global south for more than a decade now, it's the lack of empathy and acknowledgement that this problem exists that has been one of the greatest barriers. In all governments, policymakers, corporations who extract natural resources from developing nations, denuding them in the process, all stakeholders need to demonstrate greater social responsibility and not just talk about it through grandiose jargon on their website CSR page. And I truly believe that the biggest failure of our current system is that we judge the global situation through a Western lens. Like, just because we here have been vaccinated doesn't mean that the virus has been conquered. But that is how the mainstream media would have us believe. Just last weekend, the news was all about the Virgin Galactic space mission, billions of dollars literally going up in smoke, and with applause all around, while millions of rural communities, farmers, women and girls, indigenous peoples continue to suffer from hunger, disease, and abuse. So it's this lack of empathy, the sheer lack of propriety that speaks of colonialism and social injustice. Now, at Green Hope Foundation, we do call out these foibles, but we don't believe in marching on the streets and blaming governments. We believe that everyone has a responsibility, and instead of blaming others, first take action yourself. And that has been my mantra and that of all of our eco warriors at Green Hope Foundation, right from our inception to working across 25 countries with over 142,000 people from Suriname to Kiribati to Indonesia to Liberia. And when COVID hit us early last year, we received an SOS from our Bangladesh chapter about a cluster of villages that were in dire straits. Because first of all, the men who worked as daily wage earners in nearby towns had lost their jobs due to the lockdown. With money and goods running out, child marriages spiked as did trafficking and domestic abuse. And our teams began by providing food rations as well as masks, soaps, and sanitary napkins. The villages lacked clean water, with everyone using the river for dumping waste, bathing, as well as for their toilet. And naturally, disease was rife, as was infant mortality. So we built toilets, deep-bore tube wells, put in the rainwater harvesting systems into their homes. And for the first time in their lives, they had a perennial source of clean drinking water. And through our educational workshops, we taught them about sanitation and hygiene to segregate and dispose waste, bringing about a change in behavior. The next step was to solve their economic problem. We mobilized our young members and through them provided skills-based training to the village residents on sustainable agriculture, also providing them with organic seeds. They started composting their domestic waste for creating their own fertilizer. The women and girls were trained in sustainable poultry farming, and we distributed hens, roosters, built coops, and assisted the women in learning how to rear poultry. And we've just installed routers in ensuring internet connectivity so that the village residents and the farmers are better able to connect with their vendors and customers beyond the village as well. So through this innovative work program, we successfully implemented a local circular economy in the community of about 6,000 people that has now helped to elevate them out of disease and poverty and making them more resilient. At the same time, none of us can ever be too complicit and think that we have done enough, because it will never be enough. We will always have to work to achieve a sustainable world and thereafter work to maintain it. But what we can do is ensure that our words truly turn into actions for people and planet. And right now, the process of rebuilding better must focus on the creation of these local circular bioeconomies undertaken at all levels, because it facilitates economic progress that is actually in harmony with environment, and that in turn, of course, furthers the social equity.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Kekashan. That was very inspiring. I just want to let our participants know, ladies and gentlemen, kindly write your questions in the Q&A box. We'll be able to take them and we'll be able to relate them to our panelists as well. And with that, I want to turn to Mr. Kanko. Aminu, I hope you don't mind if I call you by your first name. Aminu, for you, what are the changes that you made in your farms by participating in the project that IFAD has invested in, the Value Chain Development Program? What are the benefits that you derive from the changes that occurred as a consequence? Over to you, Aminu. You're still muted, Aminu.
Good afternoon, everyone. I really appreciate your enthusiasm by giving me the opportunity to speak to you this afternoon. One of the major backbone that made me to be the successful farmer in IFAD value chain was by practicing the knowledges I learned from IFAD by putting it into actions, especially when talking of climatic change. It's not part of what you my topic anyway, but I would like to say something a little bit about that, because I've never heard of, don't know the disadvantage of climatic changes before, but it was when if IFAD VCDP intervened, we are thoroughly educated about the climatic changes, that is the causes and the dangers in it, and how to prevent it in our rural communities. Then come to your question, that the changes I make in my farms since the inception of IFAD VCDP was the first is capacity building and adapting to the good agronomic practices. Because before the intervention of IFAD VCDP, the agriculture was not seen as a business. But since the inception of IFAD VCDP, we now realize that farming is not only a common business, but a big-term business. With that, we're now adapting to the new technology that is transplanting. As a rice farmer, before the intervention of the IFAD program, we are doing the local transplanting, that is a direct seedling. But since inception of IFAD VCDP, the first knowledge we learned, that is gap of good and practices. We make sure everything I learned, be in the farm or be in the training, I make sure I put it into practices. That is what makes me to be a successful farmer today. That is number one. And number two, coming to your question again, before the inception of the IFAD, we are only specifying on doing one thing, producing rice in production one time in a year, whereby we have the irrigation facility to produce more than one time in a year. And with the inception of IFAD, with the knowledge learned from them, we are able to put it into practices to read our way that the climate, because in Nigeria, you see, in most of the day, we always experience 3 months, that is weather difficulties every year. So we make sure within the 9 months, we produce rice 3 times.
I think we have an internet outage. Well, that's late plans, but that's fine. I'm going to use this opportunity then actually to go to the
IFAD,
minister. There you are.
With the coming of IFAD VCDP, we're able to be having a linkage to the off-takers, that is the bigger buyers. Then I started coordinating the farmers, aggregating in a small scale for the bigger buyers to come and start buying. Then before IFAD now come and take an interest to even build a very big aggregation centers where, as a computer scientist, it is now came behind my imagination. I now started designing a web called AMIS, that is Agricultural Market Information System, whereby in different parts of the country, the bigger buyers will go into the website and place their order, and that we will make sure they get what they want and the quantity and the true way and measure system. And by controlling the quality of the paddy, and also we make sure that is when we separate the varieties from the aggregation center, so that if to sustain the market with the buyers.
Thanks, Aminu. I think
one good thing of which
Aminu?
Yes, one good thing that my network is skipping. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
One good thing today, that is the last 4 years. But today, how we are able to sustain this project in the country is what we call we have what we call CAF, Commodity Agriculture Forum. With that, every knowledge that have been learned, we learned with the IFAD. We make sure that we step down the knowledge to rural farmers. Currently, with that, the benefit of that forum today, I coordinate more than 10,000 farmers to give them the link with Central Bank of Nigeria, to give them the loan, and they pay back after their production. Today, the knowledge of IFAD in Nigeria is beyond the expectation, because the opportunities in the rice value chain is beyond our imagination. So with that, we really appreciate the effort of IFAD, and especially particularly me in my community as a computer graduate looking for the job.
Thanks, Aminu. I'm going to use this opportunity of a natural break because of Wi-Fi outage, I think, on your side.
Thank you.
Thanks, Aminu. I'm going to use this opportunity. So a couple of things that actually Aminu was talking about was diversified agriculture, aggregation centers, information centers, and also farmers forum that are also creating this peer group effect. And I think they're extremely useful for us to think about as to, the question that I asked the minister as well. How can we really take this down to the household level and start to make a difference? And so it really paints a very vivid picture. But I also, given how important this is becoming clearly in the overall context of climate and how we can create resilience in this context, I wanted to turn to the minister, actually, Minister Gold, and to ask you, Minister, given the current context and the current zeitgeist, in your opinion, how do you think we can mobilize greater finance and donor interest that has this kind of real impact on the ground? Over to you, ma'am.
Great, thank you, Joe. And maybe I can just start by saying, I think, hearing from people with lived experience like Aminu and who are working on the ground like Kekashan, helps, I think, really inspire donors as well, knowing the actual impact that the work that IFAD is doing and how it impacts people on the ground. I think we've heard very clearly that biodiversity loss and climate change are both being driven by human economic activities. and they mutually reinforce each other. They need to be tackled together, building on available knowledge of synergies and trade-offs and working across the currently fragmented finance mechanisms. That's what global experts recently agreed on in a joint collaboration between the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. As Professor Hans Otto Portner, co-chair of the Scientific Steering Committee, put it, human-caused climate change is increasingly threatening nature and its contributions to people, including its ability to help mitigate climate change. The warmer the world gets, the less food, drinking water, and other key contributions nature can make to our lives. This will entail a profound collective shift of our values about nature. We will need to balance pursuing a good quality of life with the limits nature will automatically set. As we consider a post-pandemic world, we have a chance to put nature on a path to recovery by adapting our demands. The report states that nature-based solutions have the potential to provide up to 37% of cost-effective global CO2 mitigation targets by 2030, and to cut biodiversity loss by half by reducing global warming. At the same time, the World Economic Forum's report on the new nature economy tells us that 10 trillion US dollars in business opportunities could be unlocked in the process. Collectively, we can create up to 395 million new jobs by 2030, while also reaching adaptation outcomes and social and health benefits that go well beyond economic value. To ensure that these integrated approaches have greater impact on the ground, it is clear that we need to strengthen natural resource governance and land equity to make sure that local people, communities, and especially women benefit from the implementation of nature-based solutions to climate adaptation and mitigation. And I think what's becoming increasingly clear to all of us is that in order for our communities, our societies, our economies, our countries to prosper, we can't ignore biodiversity loss. We can't ignore the impact of climate change, and we can't ignore the impact that this has on individuals, including small-scale farmers. And so there really is a business case to be made here to be making these investments so that we can both fight biodiversity loss, fight climate change, but also continue on a path towards economic growth that works for people and planet.
Thank you very much, Minister. Yeah, I'm taking away very important messages. I mean, there is clearly a huge amount of finance to be leveraged. I think that's one of the key things that you're pointing out. The potential for leveraging and mobilizing $10 trillion seems to be transformational and something that we should and can be talking about. And in all of this, you also exhorted us to think about people on the ground. You talked about women and smallholder farmers and marginalized groups. And I think that's a very important message because we shouldn't leave anyone behind. So I'm going to turn to Kehkashan actually and see, Kehkashan, if you want to talk to us about how, as we think of these transitions, that hopefully and inshallah will be possible with, as mobilizing additional resources in the context of climate, both mitigation as well as adaptation. How can we ensure that this is socially inclusive, that we are using just processes? And then within that, just because I can appeal to your gender, because I'm the same gender as you, sitting on the other side, how do you think we can ensure that women and their potential is realized? Over to you.
Thank you for the question. Previously we've seen that feminism, social justice, and then environmental justice have often been very distinct movements in the past, but now their intersectionality, it's really become unquestionable. And data gathered from successive climate change fueled disasters reveal that women and children are 14 times more likely to die in a disaster than men, and 80% more likely to be displaced by climate change. And we all know how climate change is now morphed into the greatest inequality multiplier for women and girls especially. And we at Green Hope Foundation have seen this firsthand among, for instance, the coastal communities in the Sundarbans, the world's largest mangrove forest that was hit last year by Cyclone Amphan and then this year with Cyclone Yas. We've seen the same story repeated in drought-stricken communities in Western Kenya, where girls and women have to walk further every year in search of water. And some of the greatest hurdles that actually hamper social inclusion and empowerment of women are the issues of land access and rights. Because in many countries, access to land is essential for survival, from subsistence farming to a source of livelihood income. So land rights becomes a critical issue that really cuts across poverty reduction, food security, and development overall. So in this context enters climate change, which not only threatens to impact all of these sectors, but as we all know, adversely affects women and girls because of discrimination and inequality that limit their access to land and natural resources. So at Green Hope Foundation, we believe that we need to address these issues not just through the climate justice mechanism, but additionally through ecofeminism, because ecofeminism recognizes the unique challenges that women face in terms of the environment, sees women as leaders who are bringing about positive change in protecting the planet rather than just relegating them to being victims as is usually thought about them, and goes beyond just women and the environment. It actually looks at the interconnection between the human race as a whole and the planet. And it propagates this new form of leadership that is less about talking and more about giving back and really leaving no one behind, giving back to our community and planet, and keeping in mind justice, equality, and peace. We jumpstart this process at Green Hope Foundation through education for sustainable development as the building block for transformation that enables girls and women to develop their innate potential, providing them with the skills, knowledge, behaviors to make them self-reliant and resilient. Civil society actors like us have a huge role to play in connecting policy with the grassroots, but honestly, each and every stakeholder has their own unique role to play in ensuring action on the ground, whether that's governments or private sector or anyone else. So that is why a single one-size-fits-all formula doesn't exist, because at the end of the day, creativity and innovation are the way forward if we actually want to ensure social inclusion and that, you know, the rights of women are recognized and the potentials of women are recognized everywhere. And above all, we need the intent, and only then can we truly leave no one behind.
Fantastic, Kishan. Yeah. Your numbers on how women and children are disproportionately affected, 14% more likely to perish, 80% more affected. The fact that we are seeing this in Kenya, Bangladesh, more recently, the fact that we have to recognize the importance of justice and equality really hit home. IFAD has a lot of these sorts of initiatives that the president also spoke about, adaptation for smallholder farmers. We also host the International Land Coalition. But clearly, what you also talked about was the importance of giving back, and I think that's really important. Minister, if you don't mind, I'd like to come back to you. What do you think is IFAD's biggest mission? How do you think Canada can best support it? Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, Joe. I mean, IFAD has had great success with piloting local adaptation approaches and scaling up best practices in cooperation with national governments. For example, in Mali, IFAD is scaling up a pilot on biodigesters and contributing to national policies on renewable energy technology. And knowing that climate change has a disproportionate impact on rural women, IFAD has been a strong advocate for community-led and gender transformative approaches. Canada believes that rooting climate actions in local needs and livelihoods, as IFAD does, building inclusive partnerships and empowering rural women lead to sound and sustainable climate resilient solutions. So for example, in places like Rwanda, Madagascar, and the Central African Republic, IFAD is helping women be the drivers of their own development, and this is identifying ways that households can build up climate resilience and food security. And as I'm sure you and many others know, Canada has a feminist international assistance policy, and one of the key mandate items that I was given by the Prime Minister most recently was to address the intersection of women's rights and climate change. And certainly the work that IFAD is doing with small-scale rural women farmers in particular helps to address this issue. And so that's why I am very pleased to announce today that Canada is providing an additional $190 million loan to IFAD. This new loan will ensure that best practices in climate smart and gender transformative approaches are embedded in local initiatives and scaled up. So in total, Canada's $340 million in loans to IFAD will make it possible for communities to better withstand shocks, adapt to stresses, and build back better as part of our pandemic recovery.
This is supremely exciting. Thank you so much, Minister. I
want to
hand it over to the President,
Joe,
yes.
Can I please, I couldn't help it, but I really ask for the floor to really express my great appreciation to my Minister Gould, for this important announcement, and on behalf of all IFAD and the community that we are serving. I really want to express our appreciation to you and the government and people of Canada for this announcement. That's great news. Back to you, Joe.
Yes, Mr. President, I was actually looking towards you, because so thank you. And really, Minister, as the President said, we're hugely excited, and yeah, we're looking forward to forging an even closer partnership with you and the rest of the country. So while we take that news in, I want to also move to Aminu. With that announcement, Aminu, what do you think is the most important change you will want to see happen? Now, you know, we are announcing and thinking about new investments that are potentially extremely exciting. What are your takeaways in terms of what new changes you think could happen as a consequence? You're muted if you're talking now.
Thank you for this very basic question. My focus still is sustainability of these activities in both at federal level and state level and even the rural areas. Sustainability in the sense that the government and agencies like IFAD needs to work hard to educate our rural farmers, and also to give us the youth opportunity to step to for having this linkage conversation like this globally, so that we will be using that privilege to make sure we step down the knowledge to our rural areas. That is number one. Then number two, gender equality is the key to every society. And I knew IFAD has taken a very great stage to make sure in the whole activities where the IFAD is operating, they focus on gender equality. I want more sustainability, because if you look at the birth rate globally of female and male is just like 50-40. The rate of birth rate of female, they are more than male, and they are not given opportunity. They are not given the opportunity. So in this aspect, in this like agencies like this, gender equality should be more emphasized. And I am assuring you that what we'll be doing in Nigeria, of any knowledge we learn, with agencies like IFAD, will make sure we step down it to even where the IFAD activities is not existing. Because IFAD activities as today in Nigeria, it has given us a very great opportunity. We are even doing beyond imagination of IFAD VCDP in the country. So
thank you so much, Aminu. And that sort of provokes a question back to you, Minister, which is also coming from the chat, if you don't mind. So we have a very active Q&A going on. So Minister, in your view, how can we intentionally and meaningfully incorporate youth expertise on climate action and food security, both in terms of intergenerational partnerships, but also in terms of communities themselves and supporting them. Yes, and how do you think Canada can support something like this, or even IFAD could support something like this in terms of climate action and food security? Over to you.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I mean, I think as we heard from Aminu, youth play such an important role in farming and in agriculture. And I know certainly here in Canada, farming is usually a family affair where young people are working in agriculture from the time that they're very young on the farm, and I'm sure it's quite similar right around the world. And the support that we provide, and I know that IFAD provides as well, often includes agriculture extension support, which usually includes the whole family. And I think ensuring that we're giving meaningful voice to all ages through this is really important, and engaging with the whole family. And certainly from Canada's perspective, our objective is to ensure that everyone that we are working with has a meaningful voice at the table. And so I think ensuring that we are being intentional in reaching out to young people is something that is really important, and is something that we do as Canada, and I know that IFAD does as well. But I think it's one thing that we can always be ensuring that we are intentionally seeking out the voices of young people. And I would say that this panel is a good example of doing that with the very strong and important voices of Kekeshan and Aminu here. But we need to make sure that we're doing that not just in panel discussions, but on the work in the ground as well.
Thank you so much, Minister. President, but I know that you're completely within your rights to turn to me for a response to one of the questions, but let me just pose it to you, which has come up on Q&A. I think two questions are essentially underscoring and highlighting the fact that traditionally climate finance has focused a lot on mitigation. And one of the reasons that it has occurred is because mitigation is and greenhouse gas emission measurement and reduction in that is just easier. So one question is, what are we doing in this area? So just with respect to IFAD, what are we doing in terms of changing that balance? And I think, so I'm paraphrasing that question. And the second one, which I'm happy to respond if you'd like, is how are we measuring adaptation? But over to you, Seth.
Thank you so much, Joe. What are we doing? First of all, what I was saying is that we noticed that imbalance in early 2010 or so. That's why in 2012, we started this ASAP program. So 3 years ago, even just, I believe, around the Paris Declaration, we decided that to really have, in addition to the mainstreaming all our projects in adaptation, we also want to step up the specific investment in climate adaptation. That's why we moved from actually ASAP 1.0 to ASAP 2.0, and now we really want to scale it up. We talk about ASAP plus on that. The second thing is really the advocacy to really make sure that everywhere we can, to call on all of us and all the major donor, and this is why I was so excited when Minister Good announced this new loan to IFAD. So we are expecting IFAD to step up its own investments in the adaptation domain. Yeah. So this, and again, I think it's important that we don't necessarily. It doesn't mean that we have to limit ourselves to the adaptation. However, we really need to work to close the gap between the adaptation and the mitigation. Over to you, Joe.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, and just to answer some questions, the question around measurement, it's one of the constraints of the international community, but I think also one of the niches that IFAD occupies extremely strongly and with high credibility, that of measurement. So we look at not just people benefiting from adaptation and resilience related activities, but we also say what would have happened in the absence of that investment. And in doing that, we actually set a bar which is very different, and if I might say so humbly, but on behalf of IFAD, which is very different and much higher than that of other organizations, because we actually say what would have happened in the absence of that investment. And that becomes really important. So one is, as the president said, that we express our intention and we really look for intention of adaptation in the investments themselves. And second is that we also, in a large part of our portfolio, measures to what would have happened without it. And these things really contribute to also then getting the larger international community to think far more credibly about climate adaptation. I had one mini question, and I was going to just open it up to the panel to try and see if anyone wanted to come up with a response. But what do you think is the potential for implementing policy recommendations on agroecology? So methods or systems that combine agriculture and ecology, while at the same time reducing the harm done to smallholder farmers' livelihoods. So where do you think policy should be directed? How can it be made real? That's the question. Mr. President?
Maybe, yeah, let me try to, that came to my mind, the policy dimension came to my mind when I was listening to one of the response that Minister Good was giving when she was insisting on the nature-based solution. And prima facie, sometimes we tend to think that one goes against the other. But in fact, we need both. And if you look carefully, one of the testimony we heard from Kekashan, I was very thrilled to see how different components, in fact, create synergy rather than going backwards. So, and what IFAD has noticed, particularly in ASAP, the first phase of ASAP, is by topping up our activities by the adaptation component. That policy dimension, fixing the policy, was hugely and critical for the success of the program itself. So we should really give a great importance of the policy dimension in moving forward, not just in the helping directly or the community without working with the government in fixing the policy side. So that I really appreciate this point made by the listener. Thanks.
Thank you so much, sir. We are in the last couple of minutes of our overall very exciting panel, and I wanted to move towards closing. And so with all of your collective permissions, I'm going to ask Minister Gold to come in for concluding remarks, please, and then turn to the President, if that's possible. Over to you, Minister.
Certainly. Thank you, Joe. And thank you for doing such a great job moderating what I agree has been a really, really dynamic and interesting panel. Look, Canada was a founding member of IFAD. We have always been strong partners in helping small-scale farmers to increase their production, connect to markets, gain better incomes, and produce nutritious food for families around the world. We really commend IFAD's efforts to bridge the transition from national policies into local impact. And the combination of the pandemic and the effect of climate change on local agriculture and biodiversity has seen women on the front lines of these two crises. It has become clear to governments, civil society, and science that there are many links between biodiversity loss, ecosystem health, zoonotic diseases, and pandemics. COVID-19 has given us a unique moment to give nature and climate a prominent role in the solutions we create and to include women and girls' voices in their design and implementation, knowing that they are on the front lines of climate change. That is why they need to lead in climate action too. We need to recognize that women have the capacity and knowledge to become active agents of adaptation and mitigation. Canada applauds IFAD's commitment to gender equality and to ensuring that women are at the center of the climate adaptation work it supports. Canada is actively promoting the integration of gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls as an expression of our feminist international assistance policy. We have found that the practical answers to climate adaptation often lie at the local level and with women. Indigenous communities too can play an important role as guardians of nature's integrity. and they are already guardians of up to 20% of the world's land surface, which is home to 80% of the planet's biodiversity. We have a chance here to pursue the Sustainable Development Goals in a meaningful way that makes us all guardians of nature, while helping to create a better future for everyone and preserving this one precious planet that we call home. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister. President Gilbert?
Very quickly, first of all, let me really thank Honorable Minister Good again for your time. And just to say how it has been fascinating, Joe and colleague, my takeaway is, again, the reaffirmation of the centrality and the intersectionality of, on one hand, the climate change, on the other hand, the gender and the girl dimension. And I can't help it by highlighting again Canada International Development policy centered around the feminist agenda. So you can see that what is coming up. The second critical thing that I'm also taking away is the importance for us to look at different level of the from listening to Kekashan on one hand and Amino on the other side. You can see the private sector dimension, the youth dimension, and the importance for us to always be inclusive by making sure that people are not left behind and working with the grassroots of people that are really fragile. So all of that, it had to be taken into account, and this is what I believe we're trying to do in IFAD. Thank you all again.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to try and close with very brief comments, but also acknowledging, other than, of course, the Minister and President, Kekashan and Amino for really bringing, I think, their stories and the narratives very close home and really highlighting the difference that not just putting resources and investments in this space can make, but also highlighting the importance of really thoughtful consideration to the intention behind these sorts of investments and commitments can bring about. And so both Kekashan and Amino highlighted the importance of thinking about justice, about equality, about participation, inclusion, bringing youth on board, and thinking about private sector. And I think we couldn't have had better speakers to help us see as to what is the difference that we can make. With that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your attention, for your engagement, and for your energy. Appreciate it. Bye for now.
Thank you so much, Honorable Minister. Thank you very much, Amino and Kekashan.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Minister.